Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Dr. Medic. My name is Justin. Today is Saturday, March 11th, and just about 36 hours ago, we did have an EMS helicopter crash out of Macon County, North Carolina, and that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about real quick. Hey everyone, thanks for visiting the Dr. Medic and watching this video. I just want to steal about 30 seconds of your time to share with you a charity that I created back in 2010 called EMS Success. Now, EMS Success is a federally recognized 501c3 charity whose primary mission is to financially support EMTs and paramedics from across the United States. We offer this support in two ways. The first way is by providing scholarships to paramedics who then agree to work for at least 2 years as a paramedic in a rural or an underserved area of the United States. And two, by providing a survivors fund to financially assist the families of EMTs and paramedics who may be killed or injured in the line of duty. Now, to date, we have raised over $1 million towards these causes. We've placed over 200 paramedics into the rural communities of America, and we have assisted almost 24 families who have been affected by losing their hero loved one in a helicopter EMS or some type of ambulance incident. This financial support comes through private donations as well as EMS refresher and instructor courses that we hold online. Our EMS refreshers can be taken 100% online, 100% at your own pace, and are 100% accepted by the National Registry of EMTs. Our EMS instructor courses are typically sold out many months in advance. Profits from these courses go directly towards the mission of EMS Success, as do 100% of all donations. If you need to renew your EMT or paramedic, or if you need to get your EMS instructor, or if you just want to visit the site and make a private donation, visit us at emssuccess.org, and remember that all donations are tax deductible. Now, let's get back to the story. So the service we're talking about is Life Force, and they're in like the Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina areas, and they've been around for, quite a long time. I mean, technically they were launched in 1988, but they kind of were around even a little bit before that. But, they're one of the premier programs. I don't even know what that means, premier. I just think it's cool to call them premier program because they invest a lot into their aircraft, and they have a great safety program, and their clinical aspect, especially being tied to a health system, this one being tied to Erlanger Health System, just makes the program, in my opinion, just elevated because of the high standard, the high clinical expectations that they have. But these guys got 5 or 6 bases, and they've been around for at least 30 years in their current form. They originally launched with Bell 412s. I believe they could take 2 patients and 3 or 4 crew, and that was just absolutely amazing and kind of groundbreaking for them to be able to do that. They kind of broke some ground with some other things too. I think they might have been one of the first, helicopter EMS services in the United States to be able to do GPS approaches and even to have night vision goggles, 15 or 20 years ago or something like that. And so that's pretty cool. They eventually switched their 412s to kind of diversifying their fleet, and they had a lot of EC135s. And I believe right now they have 2 or 3 EC135s, which is what this accident aircraft is an EC135. They have a Bell 407, and they also have a badass EC145, all Airbus models. I think they were actually all, originally Eurocopter models, but obviously we call them Airbus now since Airbus owns them. And Erlanger Health System is a major health system, in Eastern Tennessee, and Life Force has kind of just been kind of like one of their departments, so to speak. I do believe that most of the med crew work for Erlanger, and the flight aspect and the aviation aspect back in 2009 was actually turned over to MedTrans. And so MedTrans handles like the pilots and the aircraft and the maintenance and all that stuff. They have a huge outreach program. The program is amazing. But just moving on to the accident, you can go to the ADS-B exchange and look at some of the news sources. And obviously you can see this aircraft did have a transponder that was tracking with ADS-B. And so we are able to, kind of see some of the history. So let's take a look at the aircraft first. This was a 2012 EC135, originally Eurocopter, now owned by Airbus, with tail number November 558 Mike Tango. It is a P2 model, which really just signifies that it's got the Pratt & Whitney engines instead of the turbo mecha engines. And the EC135 is one of the best aircraft that you could probably have for helicopter EMS. They certainly can be able to fly IFR planned flights all the time. They could have their own weather radar and autopilot and their twin engine. They do have a rear loading system. Now, not every EC135 is the same with how their rear load system works. You could use a stretcher and load the patient on a stretcher, or you could use a sled system, which is what is used in a lot of the single engine aircraft like the AS350s and Bell 407s and 206s, where you would have to bring a stretcher up to the aircraft and then slide the patient in on a sled. Some EC135s do that, and some you actually put a stretcher in it. It's really up to the different company whether or not they want to do that. And so you certainly could have both. And I couldn't say 100% sure because I do see that they have 3 EC135s, but I'm pretty sure they had a stretcher system. And so they could have loaded the patient in the back on a stretcher. Has the fenestron tail and, dual controls up front. And, typically when you're flying in an EC135 to a scene or something like that, or to a hospital, or when there's no patient on board, one of the med crew normally sits up front, and that just aids in the safety. It's an extra set of eyes up front. They're certainly not controlling anything with the aircraft, but they're laying eyes on all of the extra stuff, and that undoubtedly helps with the situational awareness of the pilot and overall with the crew. And overall, it's just an amazing aircraft. It's an expensive aircraft compared to a lot of the single engine stuff, but it's absolutely amazing that they were this company had 3 of them in their fleet, along with a 145 as well. And so what was the history of this flight? So it looked like, it's in the evening time, and looks like they probably had some other flights, because you can see that they were flying around earlier in the day. But it looks like they were picking up a patient from Murphy Medical Center, which is right there in the Nantahala, middle of nowhere of this national forest in North Carolina, and that they were flying them up to Mission Hospital, which is all the way up in Asheville. And so when you pull up the ADS-B data, you can pull up the history of their flight. Murphy Medical Center is way down here, and they don't actually start transponding for a little bit. You can see that it picks up right over here, but the actual hospital is right here. And so they would have taken off here and taken off in a northeast heading, and they're headed to Asheville. The weather seemed clear. It's nighttime. They're in the middle of nowhere. And so this forest, this Nantahala National Forest, is pretty isolated, pretty rural area, which is exactly where these helicopters really need to be. And they're flying over hills and mountains. Now, these are kind of part of the Smoky Mountains, sort of, and so these aren't like the biggest mountains in the world, but you still got to fly over top of them. And so they were headed northeast to Mission Hospital, which is up here in Asheville. And so you see, when we zoom out, you can see how far of a flight they had to go to get to a bigger medical center. I have no clue what was wrong with the patient at all. But obviously this was an interfacility transfer, going from a small rural hospital to a bigger hospital, which it could have meant anything. It could have been priority 1 trauma that had been sent to the local hospital first. It could have been a heart attack, stroke. It could just be an intensive care patient. But either way, it was a patient that was being transferred up to the big city. And so when they take off, you can kind of follow their pathway on here, and they end up flying, getting up to a cruising altitude of about 5,000 feet. They're squawking 1,200, which means that this was a VFR flight, so they're not in instrument conditions. This isn't an IFR flight or anything like that. And they get up to altitude, and they get up to about 5,000 feet, and they start cruising it. The ADS-B data really just kind of shows their ground speed. It's kind of hard to tell how fast they were actually going, but they're going somewhere between 120, 140 knots. They're cruising along just fine. Everything seems great. and not too long into their flight, they're still holding their heading. Everything seems fine. And then when they get here into Macon County, obviously this is where things start to deteriorate. We don't have really any copies of what their distress call might have been to their own dispatch, but I don't think that there was any emergency over ATC. And then they get in and they end up making this right turn, and you can see that their speed starts to reduce down to 70, 60, 50 knots. And then, there's just some different maneuvers probably as the pilot's trying to put the aircraft onto the ground. So what happened? So let's, it's hard to tell, but let's take a look at some of the pictures. Obviously, this is the first picture that came out. This came out on Thursday night, and you can see that the skids are obviously split, and the tail boom is probably destroyed back there, and you got some serious rotor damage, and you have this tarp over the patient compartment and over the cockpit. So what happened to the people on board? So we had a pilot, he had 2 flight crew medical members, and then there was a patient on board. And from what I understand so far is that all 4 of them are doing okay, and then it just said that 3 of them had minor to moderate injuries, and I think somebody really wasn't hurt at all. And so it's absolutely amazing that all 4 of these people were able to survive this accident. And so the first thing that I looked at when I saw this was this was all that came out on Thursday night, really, was this picture. And obviously they're on a small 2-lane road. It's a curvy road. There's really not much else to see. But the first thing I thought of was this pilot is an absolute badass. He was able to put it right in the middle of the street, and it stayed upright. I'm not sure whether or not there was a bunch of trees around it or anything like that. And then yesterday, this picture came out, which was taken the following morning, and just look at these trees. Look at how narrow of an area this is. And obviously whatever's going on with this aircraft has something to do with, losing power or something. I mean, he was obviously able to control it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to put it right where he put it. And so a couple things come to mind when I look at this is I have to assume that had this been a single engine aircraft, I just don't know whether or not this pilot would have been able to put this aircraft down in this spot where he wanted to with this amount of damage. Maybe I'm jumping the gun on that. I don't know. I mean, EC135, from what I understand, it really, especially fully loaded, when you have medical crew on board, I mean, it doesn't matter how badass the aircraft is or anything like that. They're always flying at the limit with weight, patient weight and fuel and the people on board and all of the equipment. So it doesn't matter if it's a Bell 206 or an EC135. A lot of medical helicopters are still they're flying at really close to their weight limits. And so when a 135 is up there at its limit, from what I understand, if an engine goes out, it's not like a 145 or maybe a BK-117, where you could really still fly the aircraft. You can control it, but you're probably going to have to land it and put it on the ground in a very quick fashion. And so if he lost an engine and was able to do this, I got to think that it was because there was an engine that was still providing power. Now, I could be wrong on that, but it's a dual engine aircraft. And he was able to put it where he wanted on the ground. The second thing is, I'm kind of following up on my last video with the Arch video, is that the aircraft did not erupt in flames and kill everybody. And this was you can tell that this was a pretty strong impact. The tail boom's destroyed. The skids are completely split. Now the EC135 really doesn't need to be retrofitted with crash resistant tanks because I believe it has 2 tanks, but they sit underneath the cabin. And so even if they did rupture, they wouldn't typically spray all over the cabin because the fuel is at the bottom of the aircraft. And 2, whatever fuel may have come out, it didn't come out in an explosive format like it might have on a 130 or an AS350 or an H125 or something, where when the fuel tank ruptures, it tends to spray the fuel all over the cockpit and the cabin area. In this case, there is another picture here that I have, a little drone shot right here. And, you certainly can see a black mark there, and it's hard to tell whether or not that's just damage from the aircraft that has caused that mark or if that is fuel leaking. But whatever fuel did come out, if it was fuel, it didn't catch fire and erupt. And so I've got to, again, the testament of the investment of whether it was MedTrans or Erlanger to select this aircraft. The aircraft had a problem, because that's going to happen. It doesn't matter what we do in the future. There's always going to be the unknown unknowns. And this aircraft obviously had a problem. And look, this pilot was able to put this aircraft into the middle of that street, and everybody was able to survive with hardly any injuries, based on these very, very early reports. And it hit the ground obviously pretty hard, probably based on the way I'm looking at it, probably a lot harder than that Arch aircraft did in St. Louis. And that one erupted into flames right away. And this one didn't erupt into flames at all. So the last thing I'll say about this is the survival procedures that must have taken place with this crew. When you look at this aircraft, now I know that this is an EC135, and if you haven't flown on one of these, a lot of times people think, well, there's just tons of room in the back. Well, there's obviously far more room than there is on like a Bell 206 or a 407 or an AS350 or something like that. But it's not as big as an EC145 in the back, and it's very, very tight, especially at the inferior bottom portion of the patient, which isn't a bad thing or anything. I'm just describing it. You know, you still have kind of a captain's seat sort of thing where a med crew could be sitting at the head of the patient, and then kind of a little bench seat that might be on the side of the patient. And so it's obviously a lot bigger than some of the single engine aircraft, but it's still really, really tight. And somehow this med crew, and probably the pilot was helping, got the patient out. And you can obviously see that they did not get the patient out through the back doors. And so what if this patient was intubated and on the vent? How did that work? I mean, these people are the pilot's a badass for putting it down. The med crews are both a couple of badasses for being able to get the patient out and still have them survive, because whoever they were, they must have been sick at least at some point, because they're on the aircraft. And so, you know, you would hope that, they're transporting a critical patient. And if that patient was on a vent and IV pumps and all the other things, and they still had to take care of their patient, and one way or another, they were able to do it. And so I applaud the pilot for being able to put it down where he did, and that everybody was able to survive. I applaud the flight crew for being able to get that patient out and get themselves out and still be able to walk away. I applaud Erlanger for investing in this multi-million-dollar aircraft, which may have cost an awful lot of money when you first purchased it, but it just paid dividends with this accident, because 4 people were able to survive this accident and go on about their lives. So until the next time, that's all I've got for now. Check out my other videos, and hopefully you guys like and subscribe. If you got any questions, please let me know in the comments below. I'm sure this is an evolving story. It only happened 36 hours ago. I'm obviously making a lot of assumptions based on just looking at some of these pictures and some of the ADS-B data. But either way, badasses all around, and I hope to be able to talk with them one day and catch the full story. Till next time, we'll see you later.